Okay.
Hi, and welcome back to Old School. Today we're going to be in the emotional and spiritual classes, and our teacher is going to be Amanda Schaefer, author of Crumbled, A Place for Broken People, as well as other books. Amanda is a podcast host, author, and speaker. She carries with her the goodness of looking through a lens of gratitude. Her A Cup of Gratitude podcast is global, reaching more than 105 countries and 216 cities. At first I thought that was a year. I was like, oh, okay, she started in 2016. There you go. As a speaker, Amanda teaches the Bible while challenging audiences to live the way God intends. She has a way of making scripture come alive through everyday examples. Amanda's books include Crumbled and Daily Instauration. She is a contributing author in life-changing stories. Amanda has a new collaborative book project under contract and coming out this spring, and another in the works, and probably some more that you can tell us about. Love to hear it. So I'd like to welcome to class, Amanda.
Hi, thanks for having me.
This is so fun. I'm having the best time. I mean, I almost feel after each episode more connected to people who I know online than even people local, especially since COVID. I've had a lot of relationship shifts. Now, some of that I've had people talk to me about is the fact that I'm growing and heading towards finishing my book and doing some things that I heard this podcast episode where this woman said, people love you, but they love you where you were. That's where they would like to keep you, not where you're headed, because all you do is remind them that maybe they're not growing or they're not heading that way. And, you know, I don't know that it's malicious or anything like that. I just think it may be uncomfortable, just like conviction. When you see somebody making some adjustments that lead away from a sinful situation, other people may not, you know, want to be on board because they're a little convicted themselves. So
Here's another thing. Not everyone is for every season.
right.
You know, there are different reasons why you have some of the relationships you have, and some you have through every season, and others are to help you learn what you need to learn in a season, and you take that with you, but they might not come to.
Yeah, they might not come along.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is I had a young lady have me on her podcast, and she asked me about who I would want to interview if I had, you know, who older than me. And I laughed. I go, anybody older than me is dead. And I mean, I'm only 61, and people get mad at me because they think I'm besmirching God's creation by calling myself old. And I'm like, really? Really? Because 61 isn't old to anybody?
I hear you. The outside of me is turning 60 in May, but the inside of me, I go with my born again birthday, so I'm really only going to be 23.
There you
So,
go.
you know, there we go.
Well, and I've been told I look younger than my age, but I definitely act younger because a lot of what I went through and what I go into in my book is I was a little robbed of some childhood stuff, and I was made to be adulting a little early. So I claim that.
No, I hear that. You're very much keying into something I went through. It's called parental inversion, and where you end up taking on a lot of the responsibilities. And so, yeah, I am so young at heart, so joy filled. And people that know me now, young people are like, where did you get all your energy? And it's literally the joy of the Lord. It is.
It is. It is. And I'm probably, because I'm a science geek and I drill down on anything I put in or on my body. And so I am physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Old school is about the healing and the maintaining the healing in all those areas. So I tell people that my podcast isn't religious, it's faith-based because I am. But that I have had guests who are not believers. And so that's a ministry too, is they get to hear how I walked. We both walked a similar path, and here's how I got here. You know, let's talk about that. So,
I love that you do that. I really do, because I think it's so important. That my big thing is share your whole story, because I also had so much of my life before where I didn't have a faith at all. I didn't have any kind of even belief. I didn't bother to think about God. And now that's all I talk about. And so I can bridge to either of the people. And so I think it's really important. We really want to be embracing people in their everyday moments and having real conversations, and they don't have to agree with you, but the way you live will begin to consistently, I always say consistency proves character,
Right.
right? So as you consistently live, they begin to say, hey, there's something really different about her, you know?
I've had people say that all my life. Just kidding. As you can see, I use humor as like a divert. I'm a 7 Enneagram, so find the most joy out of every situation and out of life and looking for the next joyful event while avoiding pain. Now, mind you, I've addressed that, but I just like humor is my thing. My writing coaches told me I need to start speaking, and I
Mhm.
asked him if it could be more of a stand-up routine. And he goes, well, your story's kind of serious. So, yes, you can, but you do need to land the plane in a bit of a serious nature. And I go, okay, as long as you can let me have some humor, I'm good.
Yeah.
So that does segue beautifully. I have your book. I tried to get through at least some of books for every one of my guests. I can't read the
Okay.
whole thing because I have every guest has a book almost. But in any case, what I generally do here is like a raw, open, kind of transparent conversation.
Sure.
Clearly, the older we are, the longer our story could take. So, whatever kind of synopsis of how your story transpired and how it got you here.
Okay. Really hard. Again, gonna be 60, so I got you. All right. So basically, I would say I grew up in a home where people went to church and I heard about God, never met him, was actually kind of afraid of him. And over the years, because of traumatic things that I went through in my life, didn't believe that he was for me in any way. And actually thought he was kind of an angry character. And then over the years, made a lot of horrible decisions based on trying to deal with my trauma and not quite yet understanding the feelings that I had. I drank, I did drugs, I was promiscuous, all the things, right? I did have some fun, but most of it wasn't fun.
Right.
It was literally just masking the trauma. And then we'll fast forward up to 23 years ago in May. One day in my home, I encountered Jesus. I was not at church. I wasn't going to church. Literally, I heard a truth after I said and did something, and I knew they didn't match up. And everything that had been planted in me before when I had gone to church or I had heard the word, all of a sudden started growing at once. And the next thing I knew, I was realizing that I was at the bottom of a pit in the darkness, completely cut off from everything good, and that I had been fooling myself. And so Jesus kind of came down, brought me back up, and I have not been the same since. Now I had lots of traumatic things that I brought on myself, like a marriage to someone who ended up becoming a really horrible alcoholic because he chose to self-medicate when he became bipolar. But I also have amazing children that came from being married. So there's good and bad in both. Uh, Let's fast forward to once I couldn't stop talking about God. I could not get enough of the word. I could not learn enough about who he was. I could not get up early enough to pray in the morning out loud. And my whole life turned around. And as God led me through healing from many of the traumas and showed me places where he was, I began to understand how important story was, how important our story is because it carries the story of God. And so the very first book that I wrote, actually was not that book. The first book I wrote, I never published. I had gathered a bunch of people's stories together, and I wanted to share God's story in each one from the beginning in their childhood up to what they were doing now to show the thread of God working in people's lives. And so I started to do that, and the publisher wanted us to have, for legality reasons, the abusers in the story sign off. And I said, nope, not doing that. Well, you can write it in third person. Nope, not doing that. That takes the power away. And so I put that aside. I started blogging. So that first book that you had was actually excerpts from my blog mixed in with some pivotal questions to allow people who did or didn't believe to look at their parts of their stories. So I would share a little bit of my story in an area and then give them questions to look at their story. And as I unpacked it, I started to say, hey, could God maybe be in this? Did you ever think about, and if you don't want to think about that, turn the page. So it was never a thump over the head. And that was really great for small groups. And then my next book was done right as the pandemic came about. And so I really didn't get to do a whole lot with that. But that basically came right out of my Instagram. They were just nuggets of truth that a lot of people were getting encouragement from. And the beginning of that was actually even written about by some of the people that followed me on Instagram at the time, which was kind of fun. And then I moved into taking care of my parents. My parents wanted to stay in their home. The pandemic hit. I won't go into all that because I do not have time. But so for 4 years, I moved and I've been caring for my parents. My mom just passed away in January. My dad is 93. And so I followed God into this very shut off, quiet place where I served him quietly after all of this, getting up on stages and writing books and mentoring young girls. Suddenly, I was honoring God by honoring my parents. And I was a year into that season. And one day I just cried out to God and I said, God, I'll do this as long as you want me to, but I miss sharing about you. And the next thing I know, he was reminding me there are a lot of different ways to tell a story. And I was buying a microphone online and converting an old closet in the 1600 farmhouse into a podcast booth. And so that was 3 years ago. And in 3 years, it's actually the numbers have gone up since I sent everything into you. It's now being listened to in 108 countries in 2,052 cities. It's in the top 1.5% globally out of more than 3 million podcasts. And that's not because of me, that's because of God. So, why I do the podcast is, again, we're back to story. I wanted to share who God is with every kind of person, whether you believe or you don't believe. And a lot of people who listen are not believers, even though it's a Christian podcast. And so what I do is I start in the beginning. I start in people's childhood and I work my way up to what they're doing now. And we see the thread of God working in every single story. And so people have been contacting me who are not believers. They don't go to church or they don't read the Bible. And they tell me that. And they said, but I noticed something. I noticed even though that person hated God and that person loved God and that person never heard about God, but I noticed God is always the same. And so it's been this amazing experience of being able to share who he is through people's stories. When I first became a Christian, I remember reading in Revelation where it says that we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And as a writer, I said, God, that makes no sense. That makes no sense. Why are they parallel? Blood of the Lamb should be way up here. Word of my testimony should be way down here. And he said, Amanda, there are going to be people that will not come to church. They will not read my word, but they will listen to your story. And so I'm going to pour the blood of the Lamb through the word of your testimony. And that's what happens when every one of us who believes shares our story. They get a glimpse of who God is. And every story is unique, even the difficult, traumatic things we don't want to look at. Somehow God takes them and mixes them with the purpose and the calling and the good things that he's given us to do and the way he's made us to be. And somehow with God math, he makes it he makes it all work for his glory and for our good. And so that's kind of where I am. I have a new motto, and it is, I want to share about God every way I can. I take every opportunity that I get, and I say, just give me a microphone, and if you don't have one, I'll talk loud.
Well, I like your God math. I say when I talk about my book, it's called Butterfly Stitches, and the first one, it was one book at first,
Mhm,
and then when I started talking to my book coaches, they said you really kind of need to lay out what you've been through. So we're going to
mhm.
call that one a memoir, and then the second one will walk through how I see where God was in all of it for me and how it works together
Yeah.
for good. And I always call it, I say these three phrases: my story, his story, our story,
Mhm,
because it is completely his story through me.
Mhm.
The story he
That's
had for me, the story that was written for me before the foundation of time.
that's right.
And that is hard for a lot of non-believers to hear
Mhm.
because they want to understand only the love side of God, that we're, why did we have to go through that, and not understand like the free will and all the little churchy phrases we can use. But
Mhm.
that's where our stories and us talking about them and how we relate them is going to
Yeah.
help them see that it's not some that God is, hateful or judgmental. I mean, he does judge, but I mean, like, in regard to how our stories play out, this is a combination of a lot of things going on. And the crux of it is that we've all been given the free will to either choose a relationship with him or
That's right.
not, and then
That's
our
right.
activities go from there.
Mhm.
So yeah, I love every bit of it. My story trying to get the hook together has been so crazy because they want you to take 3 sentences and
Mhm.
tell what 75,000 words or whatever are going on over here.
Yeah.
And I I don't want people to just see it as an abuse story, because while
Yeah.
that is that, I'm not a victim and I'm not sitting in that abuse. In fact, I believe truly that at 2 years old, when I took one of the worst beatings, that I was already had the comforter. I
Mhm.
already had in my little mind and heart, and he talks so much about little ones
Yeah.
having such strong faith, whether
Amen.
they understand completely the terminology, God, evil, all of that. And yet, how was I able to like reconcile that and audibly in my head understand that this was my dad? That was him. That was on
Yeah.
him. I didn't do something wrong. Losing
Yeah.
a shoe should not have been that.
Yeah.
And that's how it rolled. And it did that from the time I was 2. Now, did that make me make good decisions as I got older and I was in charge? No. We're all human. And it
Mhm.
doesn't, I don't say that to lessen the abuse I went through at all. It
Mhm.
was what it was, and it was horrible and it was evil. But I cannot accept the grace and forgiveness of Jesus if I'm
Mhm.
sitting over here holding everyone else captive and
Right.
allowing, when you don't forgive, you're allowing that abuse to just kind of happen to you every single day for the rest of your life until you let it go. So
That's right.
my story is truly that he from birth was there, and that I would have either been up on a clock tower shooting people,
Mhm.
or not here because I chose that my life wasn't worth living or something, if
Yeah.
I didn't understand. And so my story is that I want to tell people how they can look back and see that, because if you're alive and you're reading my book and you've been
Mhm.
through the same types of abuse, the same thing happened. It's whether our awareness is there or not.
We're
Your
both saying
awareness
that same
came.
thing, like,
Yeah.
look back. When you look back, here's the thing, I'm working on the book I'm working on right now, aside from collaborative things, is helping it's going to be an interactive book to help people be able to share their story, to really walk them through looking back, because that's what we don't do. You're so busy living in that moment, you miss so much of what God's doing, saying, his presence, the good things, we miss it. And so I think that's the key. It's the looking back. And when we look back and then we take people legitimately through what we went through, which can be horrible, but we show them that they are not alone, that we were not alone. And then when you get to the other side of it and you're able to bridge to people who are in the thick of it, that is how God works it to good.
Yes. Yeah. And that is ultimately what I have, every person I've encountered in regard to the writing journey has
Mhm.
been that if
Yeah.
it didn't work together for good, then I'm like in a different place altogether, because that
Mhm.
would be devastating. That would be incredibly devastating if I can't, follow obediently this purpose I have.
Mhm.
Uh, I heard at a conference, Jen Wilkin talk about Rahab. That was her
Mhm.
message. And it's so funny because she even made jokes. She's pretty funny. She made jokes about how not very many preachers preach on Rahab on a Sunday sermon. And anyway, so she's the prostitute in Jericho that helps the spies, for those people who aren't necessarily believers that listen. But she talked about the fact that if the Israelites had been obedient 40 years earlier before they had to wander,
Mhm.
the deliverance of Jericho would have happened and she wouldn't have had become a prostitute. So
Mhm.
her deliverance was delayed by their disobedience.
That's
And
right.
not that I feel like I'm on some kind of grand level where I'm going to deliver millions of people, but I don't know what the Lord wants to do with my story. But I do know this is he
Mhm.
tapped me 10 years ago to get this started. And
Mhm.
initially he did show me it was for me. And then we've walked the process. So now it's a matter of if I don't get this over the finish line or let him drag me over the finish line, then I'm delaying somebody else's deliverance, because there is true deliverance in understanding how
Mhm.
Jesus worked in my story and how that works together for good. And I think that's exactly what you're doing with a
Yeah.
cup of gratitude, with each book. I think most of the authors that I've had on, especially the Christian authors who are talking about it, and in the statistics, they say 50 to 90% of the world has walked a similar path to mine, to maybe yours. I had physical abuse, sexual abuse,
Mhm.
emotional abuse, all the way through my divorce.
Mhm.
So, there is not a bit of this that is not relatable.
And each story is unique, right? The way we were created for good, the talents and passions we were given, and the things that happened to us in a fallen world, right? They're each unique. And your story is going to reach people, mine won't. And my story is going to reach people, yours won't. And that's the other thing, right? So I always say, I feel like God's trying to cast a net over the world and it's made up of stories, right? But there are these holes in the net for the people that either don't think they have a story, they're afraid to tell their story, or they won't tell their story. But could you imagine if every word of testimony, right, was told?
Right. And isn't that in reality, like the word of God does not need anything added to it or not. And
No,
the Holy Spirit going out before us,
it's a vessel.
we don't save anybody.
Mhm,
However, no, not a however, that's a bad word to put in there. Um, when we tell our story, like you said,
mhm.
sometimes that is the only way the Lord connects with some other people.
No,
Now
yes.
his word cuts. Now his truth and the Holy Spirit come in,
Mhm.
and we're on the end of the hook.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's a good way of looking at it, and it's true, and honestly, there are gonna be so many people that are never gonna enter a church building, but Jesus is able to reach them, and he pursues them with everything that he has. He doesn't want any to be lost. He didn't go to the cross for no reason. He went for everyone. Everyone is loved. Everyone he wants to save. He came to save the world. He didn't come to save a few people. And so if we do not join him in his work. How amazing that we get asked to join him in his work because he doesn't need us, but he wants us, right? If we do not join him in his work, it's not that he won't find another way to get it done. We're the ones that miss out because it brings value to those broken places and it brings health and healing. And if you can even just reach one person who can say, "Ah, I'm not alone, just one, it
Or
was worth
some sort of understanding, some sort of truth, and
it." Yeah.
to their vulnerability and to their rawness. Every single person in the process, my one of my writing coaches is just in tears every time she's had to go through my words. She's like, I keep
Mhm.
waiting for this to get better. And she understands as a believer. And she's
Yeah.
like, I just don't know how you're sitting in front of me with a smile on your face.
Yeah.
And then my photographer, I've already created a cover. And so I'm trying for traditional publishing, but I believe I'm going to end up in self-publishing. And I don't consider that a step down. But in any case, I've already got this cover, and the photographer that shot them, the
Mhm.
day I went to her studio, she had been told by her husband that he was having an affair. The woman was pregnant and he was leaving her, and she had never been anything better than a maid for him. And I was just like
Wow.
devastated for her. It was like a punch in the face. And I told her, I go, we can do this some other time. And she just grabbed a hold of me crying and said, no,
Mhm.
you need to finish this. You need to finish what you started. And I need that book like so many others do. So we did it. And we were all crying as we went through it because what she captured
Yeah.
couldn't have been more perfect. And it was a vision the Lord gave me in regard to what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I would probably have trouble getting Christian publishers. And I don't even know about traditional. Kind of fall in a middle ground gap. So I
Mhm.
think self-publishing is just going to have to be the case for the first one, and that's okay.
Mhm.
Though every bit of this is learning, but every person that I touch and every person that sees even a glimpse
Mhm.
is like so taken aback. And I'm like, that's what I want. King Jesus, I want you to see what
That's right.
is done for me
And
to get here.
and God's working no matter how it ends up being. It's not a surprise to him, right, which way it gets published or
Nope.
how
I
else
always
he can.
say he already has my agent or my
Yeah,
publisher or my whatever.
but he's also building layer by layer. So, like, where I am now versus where I was when I first wrote is completely different. I didn't ever listened to podcasts, right? I never would have started a podcast. And yet that is part of what God had for me. And he created all of these new platforms and he added to my email list. He added to my times that people ask me to write articles for them or write books for them from connecting with folks. And so now as I get ready to write this book and try to do it traditionally, right? I have all these connections. I know literary agents. I know like other people to be on a launch team, all the things I didn't have before. And so I think he, I, if I set out to grow platforms, I never could have done it. I didn't set out to do that. I set out to share my love of God. And he just used who I am and the way that I am to do it. And I think that's the other thing that's great about you. Don't compare. Don't try to be like be who you are. God made you exactly who you are on purpose. And I can't wait to see what happens because I know it's going to be just another perfect layer that leads to the next step and the next step. Here's the thing, as long as we're here and we want to share about him and we want to try to reach the world and let other people know freedom and healing and hope, he is going to continue to use us. As long as we sit at the feet of Jesus and, you know, spend our time with him and allow him to work on us, clean us out so he can pour through us. And so this is just the beginning. There'll be way more.
Yeah, no door has opened that wasn't opened by him. And
That's
we've just,
right.
I have this saying, I've dispensed with subtlety with my King Jesus. And in the morning, I pray in my living room out loud. My daughter already thinks I'm crazy, but it probably adds to it. And I sit there and my phrase to him every time is, Lord, he understands that my little discernment meter from childhood has taken a beating. So
Yeah.
I tell him what is for me, throw that door open. What is not, close
Mhm.
it, lock it, flaming seraphim in front of it. That way I know your child, because he tells us we have not because we ask not. And I tell people all the time, well, then
Right.
ask him for the wisdom. We make jokes about when we ask for patience, he tries us. Well, what did we think he was going to do? Somehow
Right.
just, yes, he could impart patience into us or whatever, or wisdom into, but how else would you in life would you show a 2-year-old how to learn that a stove is hot, don't touch it. You go through
Right.
these
He's a good
experiences.
father. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I just love every moment of it. I did not think at 61 I would be starting a podcast, but
Mhm.
when Bob told me and my writing coach Bob Goff, and he said this is how we're going to do it, I was just like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm on board. And I did
Yeah.
it, and now I'm coming up on the end of the first season and heading into the second, and it's just been fun. I'm an introverted extrovert, so talking like this or in small group is great. But now he wants me to go speak,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna let him unfold that and unpack that. I don't know what it looks like. I've been given a lot of advice of how to find places to speak,
Mhm.
but we'll just see what all of that unfolds. But I see what you're saying, how if
It's
as long as we're obedient to our purpose,
Mhm.
there's nothing that will get in the way of that
That's
getting
right.
accomplished.
That's right. And here's the thing, like in each step, he's teaching you something and he's refining something in you and he's strengthening something in you for the next step that you don't even know is coming. And I look back now, I think it's so funny because I went to college at NYU and I went to college for dramatic writing. And I remember saying to my parents at the time, it's a lot of money to go here. Are you sure? I don't really have anything worth saying. And they said, you seem to know what you want to do. And so this is the program. Yeah, we'll send you, right? And now I look back and I had to have a minor in acting, speech, and film. And the things God's doing now, I'm like, you didn't even waste that because now I have something worth sharing, you know? And I always say podcasting is like the best thing I never knew I wanted to do. I love it. I love
I knew nothing. What I had
it.
done prior to this was my daughter had told me, perhaps for the sake of book sales, I learned it on Compel too, to maybe start a YouTube channel. And so I
Yeah,
did. And she was my little editor, and I was just having fun, and I didn't care. I had like a couple little subscribers. I didn't know how to get more.
yeah, yeah.
And one of the things that Bob Goff told me too was he has a couple million people following him.
Mhm,
But he
mhm.
said, my click through rate is probably the same as yours. He
Yeah.
goes, I would rather see you have 100 today and
Mhm.
102 next month, and every one of them engaging and listening to you, than you have 2 million that don't give a rat's hind end about what you're doing. That just go
Well,
over and look at you because, Bob
that's
Goff's
true.
your coach or whatever it might be. And so I have never, when I am seeking guests or when I send invitations and stuff, it is
Mhm.
more about what is going to be discussed than it
Yeah,
is, oh, gee, maybe they have a bunch of people. Because you
yeah,
know what? He gave a shout out for our
yeah.
episode on his channels. It
Uh-huh.
didn't do anything for my subscribers. It didn't bump
Yeah,
my subscriber. Everybody thinks that if you reach out and glom onto somebody who's got more, that you're going to suddenly be famous, and that isn't true. I mean,
it's not.
it was great, and I'm glad he did it, and his followers maybe went and took a look. But I'm
Mhm.
still sitting, on YouTube with maybe I think I have 106 subscribers. I mean, it is what it is. But the
But the
Lord knows
bottom
who.
line is God is growing you how he's growing you, and
Yep.
he has a plan and a purpose for every situation, the Bible says. And so, what better way than to just enjoy what you're doing, be genuinely who you are, and share what he's given you to share, right? And do it the way that you do it. And that's why I was saying, the number one thing I see people doing, especially on Instagram or TikTok, is comparing or doing the new trend or fad or whatever. And I remember arguing with God about video because my podcast is audio only, not because I have anything against video, but I find that I have a longer, very in depth, sometimes looks at people's stories. And I find like people's walls go down a lot when they're just listening. They're doing something else. And so, but I also know myself, I'd be going, oh, your hair is really cute. Where'd you get that picture? Like, so I wouldn't be able to really listen with God's ear. Um, but I remember arguing with him when I felt like he was saying, hey, start doing videos. And that was just when Reels started. And my Instagram just shot up and my TikTok shot up, and it's not because of me. It's because what I was gleaning from my time with God and sharing that and people having an eye to look into, right?
Right.
Or seeing the joy in you, even though you're going to be 60, you don't seem 60. What's different about you? And I see that in you as well. You said you're 61. You don't seem 61. So we're simpatico there in that I think inside we are these children of God. And, I think every day we spend in his presence, we get a little younger.
Absolutely. And especially when we don't buck against what's happening. I mean, if
Yeah.
we could truly understand that when we would like a character trait, um, that is never not in the will of God. A
Yeah.
character trait that is of God,
Mhm,
wisdom, knowledge, the
mhm,
application of it, some patience, to love
mhm.
others. He's never going to deny those kinds of requests.
Mhm.
but he's probably going to work them out in you as opposed to just handing them to you.
Yeah.
And I think that's awesome because it
Yeah.
has done nothing but teach me how to be that character. And I have people say things like that all the time. I mean, one of the things I do every day too is in the morning in a journal, I write positivity because our
Mhm.
pastor did this sermon on how we have 60,000 thoughts a day.
Mhm.
90 or 75% of them are 90% of them are repeats and 75% are negative. Well,
Mhm.
we have to do a thought audit and take thoughts captive. So in the morning, I sit down and I make sure that the first words that come out, not even picking up the phone, first
Mhm.
words that come out with my coffee is positive. What? And it's just a little snippet. It's like 3 sentences of that
Yep.
day's positivity that I'm heading out with. But one of the things I choose every day is to choose joy. I even have a little bracelet somebody got me because that they knew that was my little hashtag, my saying.
Mhm.
But I also, people say, "How are you doing?" And I'll say, "Fabulous." And
Yeah.
they're like, "You can't possibly be fabulous every day." And I go, "Yes, I can." Because I
Mhm.
go, it's up to me. Now, do fabulous things happen to me all day long? No.
Right.
But I have to choose how I'm going to react to them, how I'm going to move on, how
That's
I'm
right.
either gonna, like live in it for a second, but then move past it. So I
Right.
love every little bit of what he's teaching me. And feel like, I believe that both on the podcast and on my social media, I don't use filters. I'm
Mhm.
genuine. I
Mhm.
don't like to wade into massive controversies or anything, but it doesn't mean I'm standing down from my faith.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I know the story he's asked me to tell and where my expertise is, and that's where I'm staying. That's my lane, bro.
I hear you, and you know what? You make a good point. It is a choice. I mean, the Bible says, "I put before you a blessing or a curse." And to my daughter is a psychotherapist, and she knows a lot of really geeky, wonderful things about the brain. And one of the things when I talk about choosing gratitude, like gratitude is a choice. Gratitude is a discipline. You have to think about it, just like you're talking about first thing in the morning. But the way God made our brain is there's a neural network, and the more you drive down blessing or curse, the more the drive goes that way and you become expectant for those things. So, if I'm choosing gratitude and I start my day before I get out of bed thinking of several things that I'm grateful for, then I start to become expectant for good things because I fired up that neural network. And so the more you do it, the better you get at it and the deeper the groove and the deeper the road, right? But conversely, it's the same thing for anger or bitterness or anything else. So I think a lot of people get stuck in that network,
Yeah.
and the best way to get out of it is to do what you said, just little things. One of the things my daughter suggests is just all of your senses. What's something I can see that's good? What's something I can hear that's good? And just going through and grounding yourself in the fact that even though this circumstance might not be good, there is good around me, and the one who created me is good.
And
'Cause
that
you
muscle working, because what we do believe does impact us physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually too as we move through the day. So I
Right.
think that's why when a lot of people say, "I don't think you look 61," I think it has a multitude of things. One,
Mhm.
literally physically, I am not carrying around bitterness and unforgiveness and ingratitude. And
Yeah,
so that can make such a difference. That
yeah.
changes the inflammation in our body too and makes us look less haggard and tired and lacking energy. And so I couldn't agree more. I've done a lot. I'm a science geek. I love the neuroplasticity. I've been listening to some other folks who talk about making actual physical motions with your body to
Mhm.
associate with an emotion so that
Yep.
the minute you do that, your body gets rid of that stress and heads for that. I think it
Mhm.
was Ed Milet who was talking about how he drops when he starts to have something bad going on or negative, he drops to his knees.
Mhm.
Yes, it's to pray, but it's also a physical act that
Mhm.
helps cement that dissipating of that and a good emotion and a good activity mentally with that. And I thought that's awesome. That's awesome because that's what I do every morning after I have my scripture time is the way I sit, the way I face into morning light as opposed to a screen. All of those
Mhm.
things cement in, the positivity and the good that I want to head out into the day with. And I think it shows up. I think clearly it shows up for you, your energy, the look about you. I'm not going to talk about like some angelic glows or whatever, although this light over me makes me look like an apparition. But anyway, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I imagine your daughter would be very fascinating to talk to about that too. So how I end every podcast is
Uh-huh.
with a little nugget. And as the older we get, the more we have. But I
Mhm.
would just like to hear the one thing that you wish someone had told you or that you had discovered or that you found out sooner.
Hmm. That's a very good question. I would say that I don't need to compare myself to anyone else, that the way I am is exactly perfect.
Excellent. That's awesome. Very succinct. It's so funny. I've gotten just such a wide range of answers to that question. Sarah Geringer, I don't know if I think you follow her too. Um, she said she wished she understood compound interest. You know what I mean? Which is awesome because she has walked through a divorce and it was,
Yeah,
but she wished she had understood how to maybe handle like her
sure.
money or whatever earlier on. And it cracked me up, but but it was perfect. Like when things come across social media that say what 3 words that you would tell your younger self, and I say buy Amazon stock.
That's good.
Some good advice. Come on, So I'm so grateful for having you here today. I have loved reading about your story and seeing your blog posts and your information online. You really do have a joy for the Lord and for wanting to share your story and see others find that same joy and find that relationship with King Jesus, which is what we both are out here wanting to tell our stories for. I mean, what other purpose? We want to bring him honor and glory, but we want people to understand that it doesn't have to come from a church building or it doesn't have to be some sort of earthly intercessor, that this can happen
Mhm.
on our own. We can accept that relationship with Jesus. So I love it. And I love your whole story. And I can't wait to see the books and stuff you have coming out. And when my book is getting ready to come out, I might want to wave at you and see if I can come on your podcast.
Absolutely, absolutely, anytime. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming to class. This has just been so delightful. And I will have all the connection information, book links, podcast, everything for Amanda in the show notes, as well as my connections. Love it if you go over to whatever platforms and rate, review, download, subscribe. Go over and subscribe to her channel as well. You'll get some wonderful, wonderful things to listen to and like a salve for your soul. So thank you so much for coming to class. And
Thank
class
you for having me,
dismissed.
class.
This episode of Old School with Michele Vrabel is brought to you by Brush with Greatness, a Hawaiian artist studio.